Good morning. I wanted to come on and start by sharing a little of my journey along the way after the loss of my son. Not just loss, but murder, senseless murder of my son Keith. The day that I lost my son Keith was just like any other day. It was a normal day. I had just spoken to him. We were on the phone talking, and it was odd. I had an odd sense that after I got off the phone with him, that he sounded like music. And I was meditating and talking to Yahweh. And I was like, Yahweh, did you hear that? Did you hear how good he sounded? So he sounded like music. And I was so in awe of how he sounded. And I was telling Yahweh, I said, he sounded so happy. And I was just caught up in my own thoughts and mesmerized by how happy he sounded. And I just couldn't get off the thought that he sounded like music, because I had never, ever heard anything like that before. And I couldn't figure out what it all meant. Take that in for a moment. And then after I wrapped my head around that whole conversation, I get a phone call. And I looked at my phone and I said, oh man, I don't want to answer this phone call. It was my son's girlfriend. And she always called me trying to figure out what he was up to or what he was going to do next. So I just wasn't in the mind space to want to deal with that at that moment. So something just, was on my mind to just answer the phone. So I answered the call. And she says, Mom, you know who this is? I said, yes, I know who this is. I said, hi, Janine, how you doing? She says, Mom, she said, I have something to tell you. I said, what's going on? She says, Mom, Keith was shot. I said, I kind of shook my head and I was like, what do you mean? I was just talking to him. She says, Mom, Keith was shot. Keith was shot 5 times. And something in what she said was starting to penetrate. And then EMS got on the phone and they said, are you his mother? I said, yes. And they said, what hospital do you want me to take him to? And it started to become more true to me. And I said, University Hospital. I hung up the phone. And immediately, I just couldn't believe what I just heard. And I just screamed. And I called Bishop Purnell from my church, Behashem Yahweh. And I said, Bishop, Keith was shot. And Bishop said to me, what do you want me to do? He said, do you want me to go to the hospital? And I said, yes. That's exactly what he did. When I finally was able to get to the hospital, because I was not driving at the time, I was catching an Uber. That was the longest Uber ride I believe I've ever experienced. And by the time we got to the hospital, Bishop was there. Apostle Kelvin, Minister Ron were there. And Minister LaJuan were there. And I just felt so much more comforted because they were there. Before I even got into the back of the hospital, I had to call from the phone in the lobby to let them know that I was there and that my son was in the back. They came out to get me, to take me in the back and placed me into a room. And then they came to get me and they said, you can come in the back. When I went in the back, they took me into the room where my son was. And I'm looking at my son lie there. No one ever came in to tell me that my son was gone. So I'm looking at my son, and I'm not sure that my son was deceased. I didn't know. I had no idea. There were homicide detectives standing outside his room, but because my mind was not in the space to understand what was unfolding before me, no one told me. There was a nursing assistant in the room, and I'm asking him, I says, excuse me, but can you tell me how long my son was laying like this? And he says, I'm not allowed to tell you, because I'm watching my son and I'm looking at him, and he's just lying there, and he has this tube in his mouth, and his eyes are open. And to me, it's not a new thing for me for my son to lie there with his eyes open, because he often slept with his eyes wide open. I mean, many times we would walk in the room and Keith would have his eyes open. We would think that he was woke, and we would walk in the room talking to him, have a whole full-blown conversation before we realized, oh, that boy's asleep. And would turn around and walk out laughing like, wow, we thought he was woke. So for him to have his eyes open when I walked in the room, it wasn't, a new thing for me. The new thing for me was the fact that no one verbally came in to tell me, Miss King, your son is gone. Your son is no longer with us. A doctor didn't come in. A nurse didn't come in. The homicide detectives didn't tell me that he was gone. It didn't my mind was that, well, maybe they're standing here just in case he didn't make it. That's what I thought they were standing there for. I thought they were standing there for someone else. I didn't know that they were standing there for me. I never been through a situation like that before. So how was I to know? That is how I arrived. The guy, the medical assistant in the room, he finally told me that yes, my son was gone, and he broke protocol in telling me because he wasn't supposed to. But that's how I found out my son was in fact gone. Shame on University Hospital.